Hi guys. I just want to start by saying how much I miss you, each and every one of you, and I wish that we could do this at school. But unfortunately, this is what we have to do right now. But I went to school, and I got a little sad because I looked at all your little desks and you weren't there. And it was really kind of lonely. But I went and got our book, The Tale of Despereaux, so that we can read it together. Even though we can't be together, this would be a cool way for us to kind of talk to each other. You guys, this is the first video Miss Jones has ever made or posted online anywhere. So, you guys are pretty special. Okay? So forgive me. I'm not great at making videos, but I do have some helpers. This is my Isabella. She's my favorite little helper. It's my favorite girl helper. She's 13. She's kind of an old lady, but she's my best gal friend. And Jackson. Where are you? Jackson. Jackson. Can you say hi? Can you say hi? Hi? No? Okay. Jackson is 8, and he's ornery, but he's super, super cute. And yeah. And then Cinchi, but Cinchi's still kind of asleep. Cinchi's Landon's dog, my son. Anyway, if he comes out later, I'll show him to you too. But let's talk about our book, okay? The Tale of Despereaux. Now, remember, let's go over what happened already, just because it's been a while since we read about it. So the first book, let's see if we can find it. Can you see that? Okay. The Tale of Despereaux being the story of a mouse, a princess, some soup, and a spool of thread. Then book 1 says, "The world is dark and light is precious. Come closer, dear reader. You must trust me, I am telling you a story." Book 1, A Mouse is Born. Now, we learned all about Despereaux. He was a little sickly mouse, right? He was born the only one alive in his litter, and he was born to a family that didn't really want him around. God, it's hot in here. A family that didn't want him around, and he had really big ears, and he didn't like to do the stuff that mice like to do, and he didn't like to search for crumbs around the castle, and all he wanted to do was spend his time in the library reading once upon a time fairy tales about a knight rescuing a princess. And one day he heard some music, right? And he went searching for the music. He said he could smell it. It smelled like honey. Weird. His brother Furlough was like, "You can't smell music." But anyway, he found the music, and it was the king playing his guitar and singing with his daughter, the Princess Pea. Remember, he just calls her Pea, like P-E-A, like green peas that you eat. And he talked to her. And we know that the first rule of being a mouse is that you do not talk to the humans. Well, he did, and his brother Furlough caught him. So, Furlough went to the Mouse Council and tattled on Despereaux and told them that he saw Despereaux talking to the humans. So, Despereaux was in front of the Mouse Council, and they told him to apologize for what he'd done and to go to the dungeon with a clear conscience, but Despereaux said no. He loved the Princess Pea, and they were meant to be together, and he was going to figure it out, right? Well, they sentenced him to the dungeon. So the thread master came and put a red thread around his neck, and 2 of the guards hauled him to the dungeon. Remember, one of those guards ended up being his brother Furlough. It was pretty sad, and he begged Furlough to help him, and Furlough wouldn't help him. So remember, his family didn't really want him around. So they went to the dungeon, and they threw Despereaux in. And then when Despereaux got there, he met someone. Do you guys remember who he met? Tell Mom and Dad. Jeffrey the jailer. Super gross guy, right? He always spends his time in the dungeon, and he's filthy, and he's always in the darkness, and he never showers. And Jeffrey had something that he had around his ankle. Do you guys remember what that was? Remember the rope? And why did Jeffrey say he had a rope around his ankle? It was to save him because the dungeon was such a maze that if Jeffrey didn't have this rope around his ankle, then he wasn't going to be able to find his way out. He said only the rats knew the tunnels of the dungeon and how to get out. So he had that rope so he could find his way back. He caught Despereaux chewing on it. Well, he's holding Despereaux in his hand, and he says, I could kill you right now. I've killed a bunch of mice, but if you tell me a story, I won't kill you. So that's where we leave Despereaux, telling a story to Gregory the jailer to save his little life. Then we meet in book 2. Let's see, where's book 2? Who knows? We'll find it. Miss Jones should have marked the books before she started the video. Remember, I'm bad at videos. Okay, book 2. This is the book of Chiaroscuro. And remember, Chiaroscuro is a rat. And he was born in the dungeons, and he's always lived in the dungeons. But there was something that Chiaroscuro wanted more than anything. I remember his name was short. They called him Roscuro. What did he want more than anything in the world? Do you guys remember? See if you can tell Mom and Dad. He wanted to live in the light, right? He wanted to go upstairs in the light. But he lived in the dungeons where it was always dark. And his main job, according to Botticelli, the nasty mean rat, was to torture prisoners, right? His job was to torture all the prisoners that came in and make them miserable because they deserved it, right? Because they were in the dungeon. Well, Roscuro gets assigned this specific prisoner, and this prisoner just came in, and when he came into the dungeon, hi Jax, Roscuro was, he saw the light behind him, and he was so excited because he wanted to live in the light. Well, this prisoner came in with a red scrap of fabric, and this scrap of fabric he seemed like was really dear to him, and he loved it. So Roscuro's job was to get that piece of fabric because he needed to take away anything that the prisoner thought was important to him, and that gave him comfort. And so that was a rat's job, right? So Roscuro's kind of torturing this prisoner and talking to him and asking him about his life and trying to figure out what he can do to make this prisoner more miserable. So the prisoner tells him, he says, I deserve to be here. I did something terrible. And Roscuro says, what did you do? What was so terrible? And he says, I sold my daughter, right? Remember, he sold his daughter for a tablecloth, a red tablecloth, a hen, and some cigarettes. And he walked away from her like he didn't care. But he seemed like he was really upset about it, like he did care. Well, he sold her to someone else. Okay, so we find out that Roscuro finally gets upstairs. Eventually, he goes upstairs, and there's a party going on. And the king and the queen and the princess are all sitting around eating with all the king's court. And Roscuro ends up on the chandelier above the table. And guess who sees him? Do you guys remember who sees him on the chandelier? Princess P. She catches him up there. And she says, oh my gosh, there's a rat. And everybody looks. And it scares Roscuro. And he falls. And when he falls off the chandelier, what does he fall into? He falls into the queen's soup. Remember, the queen loved soup. It was her favorite thing in the world. And so she always had to have soup for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Roscuro just falls into her soup. The queen is so scared and so startled that she falls over dead. Oh my gosh. The queen dies. And the king is so heartbroken by this. So heartbroken. Roscuro scoots away and he goes back to the dungeon and he says, I'll have my revenge one day, right? Because he wants to live in the light. Now he can't. So he goes back to the dungeon. Well, the king is so upset and so heartbroken over what happened in losing the queen that he, sorry, lost my train of thought. Jackson's moving around. That he outlaws soup in the whole kingdom, right? No one can eat soup ever again in the kingdom. So he sends his guards out to collect all the kettles and spoons and bowls. And if you remember in the dungeon, when Despereaux gets there, there's this enormous mountain full of kettles and bowls and spoons. And he doesn't understand what that's doing down there. Well, we're about to talk about that. Okay, so let's talk about the end of Roscoe. And I know that I may have gone over a little bit too much for what Miss Courtney's class has read. And my kids, this is going to be a little bit of a review for you. Not too terribly much. But I want to get you guys on the same page, okay? Okay. Chapter 7. Small Comforts. Not long after this conversation between Botticelli and Roscoe, remember Botticelli's that really mean rat? A prisoner did arrive. The dungeon door slammed and the two rats watched a man being led by a king's soldiers down the stairs into the dungeon. "Excellent," whispered Botticelli. "This one is yours." Roscoe looked at the man closely. "I will make him suffer," he said. But as he stared up at the man, the door to the dungeon was suddenly flung open, and a thick and brilliant shaft of afternoon light cut into the dark of the dungeon. "Ugh," said Botticelli. He covered his eyes with one paw. Roscoe, however, stared directly into the light. Reader, this is important. The rat called Chiaroscuro did not look away. He let the light from the upstairs world enter him and fill him. He gasped aloud with the wonder of it. "Give him his small comforts," shouted a voice at the top of the stairs, and a red tablecloth was thrown into the light. The cloth hung suspended for a moment, bright red and glowing, and then the door was slammed shut again and the light disappeared, and the cloth fell on the floor. It was Gregory the jailer who bent to pick it up. "Go on," said the old man as he held out the cloth to the prisoner. "Take it. You'll need every last bit of warmth down here." And so the prisoner took the cloth and draped it around his shoulders as if it were a cloak, and the soldier of the king said, "Right then, Gregory, he's all yours," and opened the door to the outside world, and some small light leaked in before he closed the door behind him. Okay, here's a picture. Let's see if you guys can see it. Okay, so there's a Botticelli, the mean rat, and then Roscoe right there. "Did you see that?" Roscoe said to Botticelli. "Hideously ugly," said Botticelli. "Ridiculous. What can that possibly mean by letting all the light in at once? Don't they know that this is a dungeon?" "It was beautiful," said Roscoe. "No," said Botticelli. "No." He looked at Roscoe intently. "Not beautiful, no." "I must see more light. I must see all of it," said Roscoe. "I must go upstairs." Botticelli sighed. "Who cares about the light? Your obsession with it is tiresome. Listen. We are rats. We do not like light. We are about darkness. We are about suffering." "But," said Roscoe, "upstairs." "No buts," said Botticelli. "No buts. None. Rats do not go upstairs. Upstairs is the domain of mice." He took the locket from around his neck. "What," he said, swinging it back and forth, "is the rope made of?" "Whiskers." "The whiskers of whom?" "Mice." "Exactly. And who lives upstairs?" "Mice." "Exactly, mice." Botticelli turned his head and spat on the floor. "Mice are nothing but little packages of blood and bones, afraid of everything. They are despicable, laughable, the opposite of everything we strive to be. Do you want to live in their world?" Roscoe looked up past Botticelli to the delicious sliver of light that shone out from underneath the door. He said nothing. "Listen," said Botticelli. "This is what you should do. Go and torture the prisoner. Go and take the red cloth from him. The cloth will satisfy your craving for something from the world. But do not go up into the light. You will regret it." As he spoke, the locket swung back and forth, back and forth. "You do not belong in that world. You are a rat. A rat. Say it with me." "A rat," said Roscoe. "Ah, but you are cheating. You must say, 'I am a rat,'" said Botticelli, smiling his slow smile at Roscoe. "I am a rat," said Roscoe. "Again," said Botticelli, swinging his locket. "I am a rat." "Exactly," said Botticelli. "A rat is a rat is a rat. End of story. World without end. Amen." "Yes," said Roscoe. "Amen. I am a rat." He closed his eyes. He saw again the red cloth spinning around the backdrop of gold. And he told himself, reader, that it was the cloth that he desired and not the light. Do you really think he wanted the cloth, or was it the light? I think he's kind of lying to himself there. Chapter 18, Confessions. Guys, you know I have my Diet Mountain Dew. Roscoe went, as Botticelli told him he must, to torment the prisoner and to take the red cloth from him. The man was sitting with his legs stretched out straight in front of him, chained to the floor. The red cloth was still draped over his shoulders. Roscoe squeezed through the bars and crept slowly over the damp, weeping stones of the cell floor. When he was close to the man, he said, "Ah, welcome, welcome. We are delighted to have you." The man lit a match and looked at Roscoe. Roscoe stared longingly into the light. "Go on," said the prisoner. He waved a hand in the direction of Roscoe, and the match went out. "You're nothing but a rat." Do you guys hear Isabella? She's snoring. Oh. "I am," said Roscoe. "Exactly that, a rat. Allow me to congratulate you on your very astute powers of observation." "What do you want, rat?" "What do I want? Nothing. Nothing for my sake. That is, I have come for you. I have come to keep you company here in the dark." He crawled closer to the man. "I don't need the company of a rat. What about the solace of a sympathetic ear can provide? Do you need that? Huh? Would you like to confess your sins?" "To a rat? You're kidding. You are." "Come on," said Roscoe. "Close your eyes. Pretend that I am not a rat. Pretend that I am nothing but a voice in the darkness, a voice that cares." The prisoner closed his eyes. "All right," he said. "I'll tell you. But I'm telling you because there ain't no point in not telling you. No point in keeping secrets from a dirty little rat. I ain't in such a desperate way that I need to lie to a rat." The man cleared his throat. "I'm here for stealing 6 cows, 2 jerseys, and 4 gurneys. Cow theft, that's my crime." He opened his eyes and stared into the darkness. He laughed. He closed his eyes again. "But there's something else I done. Many years ago, another crime, and they don't even know it." "Go on," said Roscoe softly. He crept closer. He allowed one paw to touch the magical red cloth. "I traded my girl, my own daughter, for this red tablecloth, and for 1 hen, and for a handful of cigarettes," said Roscoe. He was not alarmed to hear of such a hideous thing. His parents, after all, had not much cared for him, and certainly if there was any profit in it, they would have sold him. And then, too, Botticelli Rimorso, one lazy Sunday afternoon, had recited from memory all the confessions he had heard from prisoners. What humans were capable of came as no surprise to Roscoe. "And then," said the man. "And then," encouraged Roscoe. "And then I done the worst thing of all. I walked away from her, and she was crying and calling out for me, and I didn't even look back. I did not. Oh, Lord, I kept walking." The prisoner cleared his throat. He sniffled. "Ah," said Roscoe. "Yes, I see." By now he was standing so that all 4 of his paws were touching the red cloth. "Do you find comfort in this cloth that you sold your child for?" "It's warm," said the man. "Was it worth your child?" "I like the color of it." "Does the cloth remind you of what you've done wrong?" "It does," the prisoner said. He sniffed. "It does." "Allow me to ease your burden," said Roscoe. He stood on his hind legs and bowed at the waist. "I will take this reminder of your sins from you," he said. The rat took hold of the tablecloth in his strong teeth and pulled it off the shoulder of the man. "Hey, see here, I want that back." But Roscoe, reader, was quick. He pulled the tablecloth through the bars of the cell, whoosh, like a magic trick in reverse. "Hey!" shouted the prisoner. "Bring that back, it's all I got." "Yes," said Roscoe, "and that's exactly why I must have it." "You dirty rat!" shouted the prisoner. "Yes," said Roscoe, "this is right. This is most accurate." And he left the man and dragged the tablecloth back to his nest and considered it. What a disappointment it was. Looking at it, Roscoe knew that Botticelli was wrong. What Roscoe wanted, what he needed, was not the cloth, but the light that had shone behind it. He wanted to be filled, flooded, blinded again with light. And from that, reader, the rat knew that he must go upstairs. Chapter 19. Light, light everywhere. Imagine, if you will, reader, having spent the whole of your life in a dungeon. Imagine that this late spring day you stepped out of the dark and into a world of bright windows and polished floors, winking copper pots, shining suits of armor, and tapestry sewn in gold. Imagine, and while you are imagining things, imagine this too. Imagine that at the same time the rat steps from the dungeon and into the castle, a mouse is being born upstairs. A mouse, reader, who is destined to meet the light-bedazzled rat. But the meeting will occur much later, and for now, the rat is nothing but happy, delighted, amazed to find himself standing in so much light. "I," said Roscoe, spinning dizzily from one bright thing to the next, "I will never leave. No, never. I will never go back to the dungeon. Why would I? I will never torture another prisoner. Is it here that I belong?" The rat waltzed happily from room to room until he found himself at the door to the banquet hall. He looked inside and saw gathered there King Philip, Queen Rosemary, the Princess P, and all the king's men. This party, reader, was a sight for a rat's eyes. Roscoe had never seen happy people. He had known only the miserable ones. Gregory the jailer and those who were consigned to the domain that did not laugh or smile or clink glasses with the person sitting next to them. Roscoe was enchanted. Everything glittered, everything. The gold spoons on the table and the jingling bells on the juggler's cap, the strings on the minstrel's guitars and the crowns on the king and queen's heads, and the little princess. How lovely she was! How much like light itself! Her gown was covered in sequins that winked and glittered at the rat, and when she laughed, and she laughed often, everything around seemed to glow brighter. "Oh, really," said Roscoe, "this is too extraordinary. This is too wonderful. I must tell Botticelli that he was wrong. Suffering is not the answer. Light is the answer." And he made his way into the banquet hall. He lifted his tail off the ground and held it at an angle and marched in time to the music. The minstrels were playing on their guitars. The rat, reader, invited himself to the party. Chapter 20. I need a drink. A view from a chandelier. There was in the banquet hall a most beautiful and ornate chandelier. The crystals that hung from it caught the light of the candle on the table, and the light from the face of the laughing princess. They danced to the rhythm of the minstrel's music, swaying back and forth, twinkling and beckoning. What better place to view all this glory and all this beauty? There was so much laughing and singing and juggling that no one noticed as Roscoe crawled up the table leg and onto the table, and from there flung himself onto the lowest branch of the chandelier. Hanging by one paw, he swung back and forth, admiring the spectacle below him, the smell of the food, the sound of music, and the light. Amazing, unbelievable. Roscoe smiled and shook his head. Unfortunately, a rat can hang from a chandelier for only so long before he's discovered. This would be true at even the loudest party. Reader, do you know who it was that spotted him? You're right, the sharp-eyed Princess P. "A rat!" she shouted. "A rat is hanging from the chandelier!" The party, as I had noted, was loud. The minstrels were strumming and singing. The people were laughing and eating. The man with the jingle cap was juggling and jingling. No one in the midst of all this merriment heard the P. No one except Roscoe. Rat. He had never been aware of what an ugly word it was. Rat. In the middle of all the beauty, it immediately became clear that it was an extremely distasteful syllable. Rat. A curse, an insult, a word totally without light. And not until he heard it from the mouth of the princess did Roscoe realize that he did not like being a rat. That he did not want to be a rat. This revelation hit Roscoe with such force it made him lose his grip on the chandelier. The rat reader, he fell. And alas, he fell right directly into the queen's bowl of soup. Here is a picture, it's kind of hard to see, of Roscoe hanging from the chandelier right there. And he's about to fall. Chapter 21, the Queen's Last Words. And this will probably be the last chapter today because I don't want you guys to have to watch super long videos. The Queen loved soup. She loved soup more than anything in the world except for the Princess Pea and the King. And because the Queen loved it, soup was served in the castle for every banquet, every lunch, and every dinner. And what a soup it was! Cook's love and admiration for the Queen and her palate moved the broth that she concocted from the level of mere food to high art. On this particular day, for this particular banquet, Cook had outdone herself. The soup was a masterwork, a delicate mingling of chicken and watercress and garlic. Roscoe, as he surfaced from the bottom of the Queen's capacious bowl, could not help taking a few appreciative sips. Lovely, he said, distracted for a moment from the misery of his existence. Delightful. See, shouted the Pea, see? She stood. She pointed her finger right at Roscoe. It is a rat. I told you it was a rat. He was hanging from the chandelier and now he's in Mama's soup. The musicians stopped playing their guitars. The jugglers stopped juggling. The noble people stopped eating. The Queen looked at Roscoe. Roscoe looked at the Queen. Reader, in the spirit of honesty, I must utter a difficult and unsavory truth. Rats are not beautiful creatures. They are not even cute. They are really rather nasty beasts, particularly if one happens to appear in your bowl of soup with pieces of watercress clinging to its whiskers. There was a long moment of silence, and then Roscoe said to the Queen, I beg your pardon. In response, the Queen flung her spoon in the air and made an incredible noise, a noise that was in no way worthy of a queen, a noise somewhere between the neigh of a horse and the squeal of a pig, a noise that sounded something like this. And then she said, there's a rat in my soup. The Queen was really a simple soul in all ways. Her whole life had done nothing except state the overtly obvious. She died as she lived. There is a rat in my soup, were the last words she uttered. She clutched her chest and fell over backward. Her royal chair hit the floor with a thump, and the banquet hall exploded. Spoons were dropped, chains were flung back. Save her, thundered the King. You must save her. All the King's men ran to try and rescue the Queen. Roscoe climbed out of the bowl of soup. He felt that under the circumstances, it would be best if he left. As he crawled across the tablecloth, he remembered the words of the prisoner in the dungeon, his regret that he did not look back at his daughter as he left her, and so Roscoe turned. He looked back, and he saw that the princess was glaring at him. Her eyes were filled with disgust and anger. Go back to the dungeon, was the look that she gave him said. Go back into the darkness where you belong. That look, reader, broke Roscoe's heart. Did you think that rats did not have hearts? Wrong. All living things have hearts, and the heart of any living thing can be broken. If the rat had not looked over his shoulder, perhaps his heart would not have broken. And it is possible then that I would not have a story to tell. But reader, he did look. Okay, so that's like 30 minutes of reading for you guys today. And I know that's a lot. There's only 2 chapters left. Do you think we can finish them? We can do it, right? I hope so. Okay, chapter 22. He puts his heart together again. Roscoe hurried from the banquet hall. A rat, he said. He put a paw over his heart. I am a rat, and there is no light for rats. There will be no light for me. The king's men were still bent over the queen. The king was shouting, "Save her! Save her!" And the queen was still dead, of course, when Roscoe entered the queen's royal soup spoon lying on the floor. "I will have something beautiful," he said aloud. "I am a rat, but I will have something beautiful. I will have a crown on my head, a crown of my own." He picked up the spoon. He put it on his head. Here is Roscoe with his soup spoon on his head, heading back to the dungeon. "Yes," said Roscoe, "I will have something beautiful, and I will have revenge. But both things, somehow. There are those hearts, reader, that never mend again once they're broken. Or if they do mend, they heal themselves in a crooked and lopsided way, as if it were sewn together by a careless craftsman. Such was the fate of Chiaroscuro. His heart was broken. Picking up the spoon and placing it on his head, seeking revenge. These things helped him to put his heart together again, but it was, alas, put together wrong. "Where is the rat?" shouted the king. "Find the rat!" "If you want me," muttered Roscoe as he left the banquet hall, "I will be in the dungeon in the darkness." Chapter 23, Consequences. There were, of course, dire consequences of Roscoe's behavior. Every action, reader, no matter how small, has a consequence. For instance, the young Roscoe gnawed on Gregory's rope, the jailer, and because he gnawed on the rope, a match was lit in his face, and because a match was lit in his face, his soul was set afire. The rat's soul was set afire, and because of this, his journey upstairs seeking the light was made. Upstairs in the banquet hall, the Princess Peace spotted him and called out the word rat. And because of this, Roscoe fell into the queen's soup. And because the rat fell into the queen's soup, the queen died. You can see, can't you, how everything relates to everything else? You can see quite clearly how every action has a consequence. Remember, before our big break, we were talking about cause and effect. So remember how one cause has an effect, which has another effect and another effect, right? So because we do one thing, this happens, and then because that happened, this happens. For instance, if, reader, you would indulge me and allow me to continue this mediation of consequences, below, because the queen died while eating soup, the heartbroken king outlawed soup. And because soup was outlawed, so were all the instruments involved in making and eating soup, spoons and bowls and kettles. These things were collected from all the people in the kingdom of Dor, and they were piled in the dungeon. And because Roscoe was dazzled by the light of one match, and journeyed upstairs and fell into the queen's soup, and the queen died, the king ordered the death of every rat in the land. The king's men went bravely into the dungeon to kill the rats. But the thing about killing rats is that you must first find a rat. And if a rat does not want to be found, reader, he will not be found. The king's men succeeded, only in getting lost in the dungeon's tortuous mazes. Some of them, in fact, did not even find their way out again and died there in the dark heart of the castle. And so, the killing of all rats was not successful, and in desperation, King Philip declared that the rats were illegal. He declared them outlaws. This, of course, was a ridiculous law, as rats are already outlaws to begin with. How can you outlaw an outlaw? It is a waste of time and energy, but still, the king officially decreed that all rats in the kingdom of Dor were outlaws and should be treated as such. When you are a king, you may make as many ridiculous laws as you like. That is what being a king is all about. But reader, we must not forget that King Philip loved the queen and that without her he was lost. That is the danger of loving. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how many kingdoms you rule, you cannot stop those you love from dying. Making some soup illegal, outlawing rats, these things soothe the poor king's heart, and so we must forgive him. And what of the outlawed rats? What of one outlawed rat in particular? What of Chiaroscuro? In the darkness of the dungeon, he sat in his nest with the spoon atop his head. He set to work fashioning for himself a kingly cape made out of a scrap of a red tablecloth. And as he worked, and as he worked, old one-eared Botticelli Rimorso sat next to him, swinging his locket back and forth, saying, you will see what comes from rats going upstairs. I hope that you've learned your lesson. Your job in this world is to make others suffer. Yes, said Roscoe. Yes, that's exactly what I intend to do. I will make the princess suffer for how she looked at me. And as Roscoe worked and planned, the jailer Gregory held tight to the rope and made his own way. Through the darkness, in the dank cell, the prisoner, who had once had a red tablecloth, now had nothing, spent his days and nights weeping quietly. High above the dungeon upstairs in the castle, a small mouse stood alone one evening as his brother and sister sniffed for crumbs. He stood with his head cocked to one side, listening to a sweet sound he did not yet have a name for. Somebody's getting nosy. Look. It's getting nosy. Nosy butt. Jackson. Okay. Are you done? Okay. He's done. There would be consequences for a mouse's love for music. You, reader, know already some of the consequences. Because of the music, the mouse would find his way to the princess. He would fall in love. And speaking of consequences, the same evening that Despereaux stood inside the castle, hearing music for the first time, outside the castle in the gloom of dusk, more consequences drew near. A wagon, driven by a king's soldier and piled high with spoons and bowls and kettles, was making its way to the castle. And beside the soldier, there sat a young girl with ears that looked like nothing so much as pieces of cauliflower stuck on either side of her head. The girl's name, reader, was Miggery Sow. And though she did not yet know it, she would be instrumental in helping the rat work his revenge. End of second book. So, tomorrow we will read book 3, Gore, the Tale of Miggery Sow. She's a super interesting character. I'm really excited to read it to you guys. Hey, I have kept you long enough, but I love you, every one of you, and I miss you, and feel free to comment, okay, and I will answer you back. I'm only posting this for you guys, nobody else, so talk to me. I miss you. Bye.